One quiet afternoon along a river in the United States, two people drifting slowly in a small boat noticed a strange object caught near the riverbank. At first, they assumed it was just debris carried by the current, but as they moved closer, a strong foul odor filled the air and immediately signaled that something was wrong. Among the reeds near the muddy shoreline lay a body tightly bound with rope and wrapped inside an old bedsheet, motionless in the shallow water. Within minutes of the report, police and rescue teams arrived at the scene. When the soaked fabric was carefully removed, investigators discovered the remains of a man believed to be in his 30s. The body was already in an advanced stage of decomposition, and the face was so badly damaged that identification was impossible. There were no documents, no personal belongings, and no obvious clues pointing to who the victim might be. The scene offered almost nothing that could immediately guide the investigation. The question remained: who had committed such a brutal act, and why had the victim been discarded in such a cold and careless manner? As the investigation continued, detectives began tracing events back to the final months of 2024 inches, the city of Cleveland, an industrial area in the American Midwest. The city was known for its quiet neighborhoods and aging brick buildings that had stood for decades. Life there followed a steady routine. Most residents worked regular jobs and returned home in the evenings. Occasional minor crimes appeared in local news but were quickly forgotten. At that time, the city was entering the colder part of the year. Winds from the lake brought damp and heavy air, and people were preparing for winter, when snow would soon cover the streets, and daily life would become even more confined indoors. Amid this seemingly ordinary setting, a 32-year-old man suddenly disappeared without explanation. He was known as a caring and responsible person who kept in close contact with his family. He called his mother almost every day and regularly sent messages to his young daughter before bedtime. Then, around the middle of October, those routines suddenly stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. At first, relatives assumed he might simply be busy or away for a few days. But as time passed, concern gradually turned into fear. After many days without news, his father decided to visit his son's apartment to check on him. He knocked repeatedly, but no one answered. Inside, there was only silence. Neighbors reported that they had not seen him for quite some time. Another troubling detail soon emerged. The woman who had been living with him had also disappeared during the same period. After receiving the missing person report, investigators quickly opened a formal case. The first place they examined was the apartment where the couple had been living. When officers arrived, the door was locked, and there were no signs of activity inside. Fearing that someone might be in danger, police obtained emergency authorization to enter. The door was forced open, revealing a dark and cold interior. From the moment they stepped inside, investigators noticed several unusual details. The apartment was nearly empty. Many belongings had been removed, and shelves stood bare as if someone had left in a hurry. The air felt heavy and stale. Dark stains on the wooden floor quickly drew attention. Under specialized lighting, the marks reacted in a way consistent with traces of blood that had been partially cleaned. Forensic technicians were called in immediately. Samples were collected, and each room was carefully examined. In the bathroom, investigators found discarded paper towels bearing faint brownish marks. The evidence suggested that someone had attempted to clean the area. Inside a closet, small pieces of fabric were discovered with reddish-brown stains, possibly from bedding or clothing that had been cut apart. The bedroom revealed another important detail. The mattress was missing, leaving only the empty bed frame standing in the center of the room. The kitchen appeared unusually neat. Utensils were arranged in order, and surfaces looked freshly cleaned. However, according to neighbors, a large kitchen knife that the resident often used was no longer there. When all the details were put together, investigators concluded that the apartment had not simply been abandoned. The evidence pointed to a deliberate effort to remove traces and conceal what had happened. During a review of residents' records, police confirmed that the woman living with the missing man had vanished at the same time. This discovery shifted the case from a routine missing person investigation into a suspected violent crime. The apartment contained none of the woman's personal belongings. Clothing, jewelry, toiletries, and even the smallest everyday items were gone. There was no note, no message, and no attempt to contact either her own family or the relatives of the missing man. Everything suggested that she had left quietly and with clear intention shortly after the events that took place inside the apartment. From that moment on, the name Diamond Vaden was no longer listed as a missing person. She became the primary suspect in the investigation. George Anthony was born on the 6th of October, 1992, in Cleveland. He was the only son of George Jacob Sr. and Sonia Coway. To his family, he was remembered as an energetic and affectionate person. Friends often described him as someone who made connections easily. He approached strangers with openness and warmth, and it rarely took long before new acquaintances became friends. As a child and teenager, he was known for his lively personality and constant sense of humor. Wherever he went, there was usually laughter and conversation. Those who knew him often said he had a natural ability to make people feel comfortable and welcome. During his school years, he attended Rhodes High School before continuing his education at a vocational training center, where he completed courses in information technology and customer service. For him, education represented an opportunity to build a stable future through his own effort. After finishing his training, he worked in several different positions before eventually becoming a transportation supervisor for a local logistics company. He took pride in his work because it allowed him to support his family and maintain a steady life. Although he remained closely connected to Cleveland, he frequently traveled to nearby cities to visit relatives and longtime friends. Despite his responsibilities at work, the most important part of his life was his daughter, Jana, born in 2018. Even after separating from the child's mother, he remained actively involved in raising his daughter and stayed in regular contact with her mother. The two continued to cooperate in caring for the child. He often described his daughter as the best part of his life. No matter how busy his schedule became, he tried to return home early whenever possible just to spend time with her. Playing with his daughter and hearing her laughter brought him a sense of peace that made the pressures of daily life easier to bear. His disappearance left a deep void for everyone who knew him. To his mother, he was a source of pride. To his father, a dependable son. And to younger relatives, a cheerful older brother figure. Within the family, he played a central role in keeping relationships close. When he suddenly vanished, relatives and friends were left confused and frightened. No one could accept the idea that such a familiar and dependable person could simply disappear without explanation. While the search efforts produced little progress, forensic analysis began to reveal disturbing findings. Samples collected from the apartment floor were confirmed to match George's DNA, indicating that he had likely been seriously injured or killed inside the residence. Partial fingerprints recovered from unusual locations, such as cabinet edges and floor surfaces, were consistent with Diamond Vaden's records. Investigators also identified fabric fibers stained with dark residue that matched the type of bed sheets known to have been used in the apartment. Some pieces of the bedding were missing, leading investigators to suspect that the material might have been used to wrap or transport a body before being partially destroyed and discarded. By the winter of 2024, the investigation had slowed considerably. Cold weather settled over Cleveland, and heavy fog and snow covered the streets. The atmosphere of uncertainty surrounding the case grew heavier with time. Inside George's family home, life seemed to stand still. Since the day he disappeared, relatives lived in a state of constant anxiety. Hope remained, but it grew weaker as weeks turned into months. Search efforts continued across the city and surrounding areas. Hundreds of posters bearing George's photograph were placed in public spaces with a simple message asking for help in bringing him home. Friends and community members shared information online, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have seen him. Despite these efforts, months passed without any meaningful leads. There were no phone calls, no confirmed sightings, and no signs that he was still alive. As time went on, the possibility of finding him alive became increasingly uncertain. The mother quietly looked at her son's photograph every night, while the father admitted in an interview that he had begun to lose hope. His voice grew low and unsteady. "I only want my son to come home, no matter how." Everything seemed hopeless until the 15th of October, 2025. About 80 kilometers west of Cleveland, the Huron River in Erie County, Ohio, flowed silently through the calm scenery of an early summer afternoon. Two local residents paddled their kayaks along the riverbank, enjoying a rare, clear, and breezy day, when they suddenly noticed an object tangled among the reeds near the water. At first, they thought it was just a bag carried by the current, but as they moved closer, a strong and indescribable odor spread through the still air. A sense of unease slowly grew as they realized it was not an ordinary object. Among the thick reeds, the shape of a human body emerged, tightly wrapped in a bedsheet and secured with multiple loops of thick rope commonly used on boats. The shimmering reflection of the water made the scene even more disturbing under the fading afternoon sunlight. The two kayakers froze for a moment before quickly backing away, trembling as they called the local police. They could not have imagined that beneath the surface of that seemingly peaceful river lay a secret that had waited months to be revealed. The Erie County Sheriff's Office quickly deployed officers to the scene, where the quiet Huron River suddenly became the center of a serious criminal investigation. The area where the victim was found lay deep within dense reeds, about 300 meters from the Route 2 bridge, with mud reaching knee level, a place rarely visited. Sheriff Paul Sigg, a veteran investigator with more than 3 decades of experience, understood the situation at a glance. Speaking briefly to reporters, he said the way the victim had been wrapped already revealed everything. "This was done by a human being," he stated calmly, though tension was evident in the voice of a man long familiar with violent crime. The body had been severely decomposed after months in the water. There were no fingerprints, the face was unrecognizable, and there were no identification documents or immediate clues to reveal the victim's identity. The unidentified remains were transported to the Lucas County Medical Examiner's Office, where specialists began the slow and careful process of identification. Bone and dental samples were collected and compared with dental records, while DNA testing was conducted. This was the only way to uncover what the victim could no longer tell. Meanwhile, Sheriff Paul Sigg appeared on local television to release an official description. A male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, about 1.65 meters tall, wearing autumn clothing. With several tattoos on the body, he urged the public to provide any information, no matter how small. The announcement spread quickly, and within hours, the news reached investigators in Cleveland. Upon hearing the description, detectives immediately took notice. The age, height, and build all matched George Anthony Sinia, a man who had disappeared without a trace the previous October. They wasted no time. Dental records and family DNA samples were sent for comparison. Under the cold fluorescent lights of the examination room, technicians carefully matched every detail, and a name gradually emerged from the darkness. On the 2nd of May 2025, after months of analysis and verification, the Erie County Sheriff's Office officially announced the results. The victim found along the Huron River was George Anthony Core. The 32-year-old man had been missing from Cleveland for months. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA testing, bringing an end to the family's long search filled with hope and despair, while at the same time opening a wound of silent grief as the truth emerged in the most brutal way. The news reached Cleveland on a gloomy morning. Sonia Coway, George's mother, collapsed when she heard her son's name over the phone. George Sr.'s father could only stand in silence. "I once thought we would never find George again, but in the end, we were able to bring our son home." From that moment on, George's disappearance was officially treated as a homicide investigation. Attention focused on one person, Diamond Vaden, the woman who had once lived with him. Cleveland police immediately expanded the investigation and coordinated with law enforcement in neighboring counties to locate her. Evidence that had once seemed scattered and inconclusive suddenly aligned perfectly with the forensic findings. The gray bedsheet wrapped around the body matched the type previously supplied to George's apartment. A torn section corresponded exactly to brown-stained fabric fragments discovered earlier at the residence. Most notably, the remaining portion of the sheet had been tied with thick polypropylene rope, a type commonly used in maritime work, and not found in George's apartment, suggesting the perpetrator had prepared in advance or brought the materials from elsewhere. Findings from the Lucas County Forensic Laboratory revealed details that left investigators deeply unsettled. Examiners discovered multiple fractures and trauma marks on the remains, indicating the victim had suffered significant physical force before death. The intact autumn clothing supported the theory that the incident occurred around mid-October 2024, precisely matching the time George disappeared. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be fully determined. However, the medical examiner concluded that the death resulted from physical violence inflicted by another person, most likely involving suffocation or trauma to the head and neck. Based on these findings, detectives reconstructed the sequence of events, concluding that George had been killed inside his own apartment. Afterward, the body was wrapped in a bedsheet, tied with rope, and transported to the Huron River area, nearly 80 kilometers from Cleveland, where it was disposed of. Once the identification was confirmed, a special task force was established, including Cleveland homicide detectives, the Missing Persons Unit, the Cleveland Homicide Initiative, working together with the FBI and the Ohio Bureau of Investigation, along with support from the Sheriff's Office. This large-scale coordination reflected both the seriousness of the case and the determination of law enforcement to pursue it to the end. The remaining objective was to prove Diamond Vaden's involvement and locate where she had been hiding after the crime. However, the available evidence was still insufficient to formally charge her. Investigators needed undeniable confirmation, and modern forensic science provided it. Under a court order, police collected Diamond's DNA from personal items that remained behind, including hairbrushes, old clothing, and even biological samples from relatives. The analysis revealed decisive results. Diamond's DNA was found on the bedsheet, wrapped around the body, and on blood-stained clothing recovered from the apartment. This indicated that she had direct contact with, and possibly participated in, the handling of physical evidence connected to the crime. At the same time, investigators analyzed electronic records that yielded critical information. Phone location data, calls, and messages revealed a highly unusual pattern. During the night of October 18 into the early hours of the 19th of October 2024, her phone signal left Cleveland, traveled westward, then disappeared for several hours before reappearing near the suburbs at dawn. That route matched almost exactly the distance between Cleveland and the Huron River, where the wrapped body was discovered months later. Further analysis of the GPS data from Diamond's vehicle, combined with traffic camera footage, confirmed that the car traveled along Route 2 between approximately 1 and 2 a.m. on October 19. Notably, This is the only major road crossing the Huron River in that area. While reviewing message records after October 19, police discovered several cryptic texts. In one message, she wrote to a friend, "It's all done. I'm leaving soon." In another, she warned, "Don't believe what the media says." At that time, however, no public reports about George's disappearance had yet been released. These short and seemingly casual statements suggested a vague confession and revealed the mindset of someone attempting to escape, forgetting that the truth cannot remain buried forever. After months of tracking leads, police finally located Diamond Vaden. She had returned to Cleveland, rented a new apartment, and was living with Emmanuel McQueen Janor, age 41, a man with a prior criminal record known to local authorities. During her time in hiding, Diamond appeared to rely on Emmanuel and used the apartment as a temporary refuge. This information was quickly reported to the task force, creating an opportunity to end the long search. In July 2025, a carefully planned arrest operation was prepared in complete secrecy. Cleveland police investigators coordinated closely with local units, quietly monitoring the apartment where she was staying for several days. Every detail, daily routines, movements, and Emmanuel's presence was carefully documented. Once sufficient evidence had been gathered, arrest warrants were approved. In the early morning hours of the 21st of May, 2025, a quiet neighborhood on Cleveland's west side suddenly filled with tension. A tactical team equipped with full gear silently approached from multiple directions and surrounded the building. Every step had been precisely planned. Officers chose a moment when both Diamond and Emmanuel were inside the apartment, eliminating any chance of escape. At exactly 4 a.m., a knock sounded at the door, followed by the announcement of police presence. Inside, a heavy silence lingered before a figure suddenly appeared at the bedroom window. Diamond attempted to escape through the fire exit, but officers were already positioned below. With no way out, she surrendered without expression. In the living room, Emmanuel was quickly subdued. The operation ended cleanly, no shots fired, and no mistakes. On May 25, the Cuyahoga County Grand Jury convened to review the case and the evidence presented by prosecutors. After a short deliberation, the panel unanimously concluded that sufficient legal grounds existed to bring the case to trial. Under the indictment, Diamond Vaden faced multiple serious criminal charges. With the formal charges announced, she was scheduled to appear before the Cuyahoga County Court. Given the severity of the case and the high risk of flight, the judge ordered her held in custody and denied all requests for release on bail. Earlier, during a preliminary hearing, her bail had been set at $1 million, a sum far beyond her ability to pay. The suspect's background gradually became clearer. Diamond Vaden, born in the early 1990s, was a Cleveland native from Ohio. Before the shocking case emerged, her name had been largely unknown. She had lived quietly, with little public information about her family or early life. However, statewide records in Ohio revealed that she had a prior criminal conviction. As a result, she had been classified as under disability, meaning she was legally prohibited from possessing or using firearms. Under state regulations, such restrictions apply only to individuals who have committed serious offenses or have criminal records related to public safety violations. Although the specific details were not disclosed, the classification indicated that she had previous encounters with the law. Many people described her as strong-willed, sometimes impulsive, and someone who had already paid the price for earlier mistakes. No one knows exactly when Diamond, Vaden, and George first met, but the fact that they moved into the apartment on Boscott Street together suggested that their relationship had become serious. According to people close to George, Diamond had once been welcomed by his family as if she were one of their own. She was seen as a partner he trusted and cared about deeply. Yet the apparent calm masked underlying tensions. Some of George's friends recalled occasional disagreements between the two. George was known as gentle and soft-spoken, rarely raising his voice, while Diamond was described as possessive and easily jealous, especially because he remained in contact with the mother of his daughter. These seemingly minor conflicts gradually formed hidden cracks that deepened over time. The turning point came on the evening of the 18th of October, 2024. After finishing work, George drove back to the small apartment on Boscott Street, where he and Diamond lived together. No one knows exactly what happened behind the closed door that night, but something was clearly different. It is possible that Diamond discovered a message or phone call from George's former partner, the mother of little Jana, which may have triggered jealousy. It is equally possible that long-standing tensions finally erupted beyond control. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices around 8 p.m. A woman's voice sounded sharp and angry, while a man's voice seemed calmer, almost pleading, as if trying to diffuse the situation. By around 9 p.m., the argument had intensified beyond ordinary disputes. The sounds of shouting were followed by crashing noises and objects being knocked over. At some point, events spiraled out of control. In a burst of anger, Diamond reportedly grabbed a hard object within reach, possibly a missing kitchen knife or a metal piece from a lamp, and struck George. The sudden blow caused him to collapse in shock before he could react. A dark stain spread across the wooden floor. He tried to stand again, but the attack continued. Evidence suggested that he struggled desperately. Long streak marks on the wall appeared to show where his hands searched for support in a final attempt to escape. Within minutes, his strength faded and his life slipped away. When the violence ended, the room fell silent. One person lay motionless on the floor, while the other stood facing the consequences of what had happened. In that moment, what had once been a loving relationship had turned into an irreversible tragedy. After the initial shock, fear took over. Diamond began trying to erase the most obvious traces of the incident and conceal what had happened inside the apartment. Broken objects were gathered, stains were wiped away, and belongings were hastily packed. Then she turned to the most difficult problem. George was a large man, weighing nearly 72 kilograms, making it impossible to move him far alone. In desperation, she decided to use a bedsheet to help. She removed the fitted sheet from the mattress, folded it carefully, and arranged it in a way that would make transport easier. Searching for something to secure the bundle, she remembered a coil of heavy-duty rope she had once brought home from a part-time job at a marina, where it had been used to tie down cargo. She went to the garage, retrieved the rope, cut it into sections, and tightly secured the wrapped bundle. After midnight, Diamond quietly dragged the heavy load to the back exit of the apartment, deliberately avoiding the front entrance where neighbors might see her. Outside, the yard was dark, except for faint streetlights filtering through bare branches. She paused to listen, then opened the trunk of her sedan and forced the bundle inside. Soon afterward, she drove westward through the silent city, merging onto Federal Route 2. She chose that route because it passed through sparsely populated areas where few people traveled at night. Her only thought was to find a remote place where the last traces could disappear. Around 1 a.m. on the 19th of October, 2024, after more than an hour of driving, she reached the bridge crossing the Huron River near the city of Huron in Erie County. She slowed down and pulled onto a quiet shoulder, waiting a moment to make sure no one was nearby. The sky was moonless, with only faint starlight reflecting on the dark water below. She opened the trunk and dragged the heavy bundle out, then moved step by step toward the railing. Without a word, she pushed the bundle over the edge. A faint splash echoed and then faded. Moments later, the river's surface returned to stillness. During the months that followed, Diamond appeared unconcerned with what had happened. She quickly built a new life with Emmanuel, remaining out of sight. Perhaps she believed the past would disappear if George were never found. That false sense of safety gradually made her more confident. She returned to Cleveland as though she had never left. There may have been plans for a new job and a new identity, but her apparent calm concealed something darker. For more than half a year, she showed no visible sign of remorse or fear. Her behavior suggested calculation and emotional detachment, the mindset of someone convinced that the truth would never surface. Life seemed ordinary again until the end of July 2025, when loud knocks echoed at the apartment door and police officers forced entry. Everything happened within seconds. In that moment, Diamond Vaden's double life came to an end. The illusion of normalcy vanished, replaced by the cold reality of handcuffs. There was no place left to hide, and nothing left to conceal, only the truth and the sentence that awaited. After being indicted in July 2025, Diamond Vaden appeared in court for her arraignment in Cuyahoga County. She remained calm, almost expressionless. Through her defense attorney, she entered a plea of not guilty to all charges, a common step in the early stages of criminal proceedings. The judge ordered that she remain in custody without bail, citing the seriousness of the charges and the high risk of flight. Under the procedures of the U.S. justice system, she would have time to prepare her defense, with the full trial expected in 2026. Prosecutor Michael O'Malley stated that his office would do everything possible to ensure justice. The prosecution possessed a substantial body of evidence, including DNA analysis, location data, phone records, forensic reports, and physical evidence. Legal analysts predicted that the defense might attempt to deny Diamond's direct involvement in George's death, or possibly shift suspicion toward her new partner, Emmanuel. However, observers believed that the volume of evidence made it extremely difficult to convince a jury of an alternative explanation. As of October 2025, the case remained in the pretrial phase. Legal procedures continued as both sides prepared evidence for the upcoming trial. No final verdict had yet been reached. Justice was still in progress. The case shocked the public not only because of the severity of the crime, but because the tragedy began in a place where trust and affection were expected to exist. What once seemed like an ordinary relationship gradually turned into a pattern of jealousy, control, and emotional damage. The case also highlighted a perspective often overlooked. Violence within relationships does not depend on gender. In this instance, the victim was a man. It demonstrated that anyone, regardless of strength or personality, can become vulnerable when affection crosses the boundary of respect and turns into obsession. In your opinion, considering everything that happened, what sentence would be appropriate for Diamond Vaden? Share your thoughts in the comments and follow the channel for more real crime stories so you do not miss upcoming videos.